welcome. This is the podcast on a book by Springer Press titled The Handbook of Virtual Exchange Across Disciplines, Building Global Citizens at Home. I'm here with three authors here on a chapter who are really researching some important concepts regarding preparing our teachers. Their chapter is titled Advancing Teacher Development Through the Lens of the Learning Science Principles and the Teacher Action Framework. And this was a virtual exchange collaboration between South Africa and the United States. The authors are Dr. Alina Slapak, Dr. Karen Collette, and Dr. Natalie Bolton. Before we begin, I would like us to introduce yourselves, and then we are going to talk about the focus of the handbook, answering the questions, what impact did virtual exchange have on the disciplinary learning outcomes of preparing teachers? And what would have happened or been missed if that virtual exchange experience, that global collaboration had not occurred? But before we begin, let's first introduce ourselves, and then we'll move into how you met as partners, and then we will talk about the content. Why don't we begin with Dr. Alina Slapak? Why don't you go first?
Sure. Kelly, thank you so much for the invitation. We are truly honored to contribute to this timely and important handbook and to have our chapter selected for open access. Congratulations as well to the other scholars featured in this book. I'm Dr. Alina Slapak, an associate professor of education at the University of Missouri, St. Louis in the College of Education in the United States, Department of Educator Preparation and Leadership. My work focuses on action research, internationalization in higher education, and teacher development, with particular attention to virtual exchange grounded in social justice and critical frameworks. I also serve as the section head editor for the education and teacher development section of this handbook.
Karen?
Yes, I'm going to come in. So I'm Karen Collette. I'm an associate professor in the Faculty of Education at the University of the Western Cape in Cape Town, South Africa. And I'm in the Business Science Management Education cluster. And my focus, my disciplinary focus is on educational leadership and management. And I've got a particular interest in pedagogy in higher education linked to collaborative online international learning. And in my school research, I've got a particular interest and focus on the leadership and the well-being of educators.
Natalie?
And hello, everybody. I am Natalie Bolton. Like Alina, I am also from the University of Missouri, St. Louis in the College of Education. I am an associate professor in our Department of Educator Preparation and Leadership, and I also serve as the Director of Quality Assurance. My research focuses a lot on assessment literacy, and I also focus on learning sciences.
Wonderful. And my name is Dr. Kelly Tzoumis. I am a professor emeriti, and I am the moderator for this podcast. Well, let's begin. Before we answer the research questions on the impacts to disciplinary learning from the virtual exchange, I want to talk first about the content of your chapter. I found it fascinating. The three core learning science principles that then also combine with the teacher action framework and lead to developing our pre-service and in-service teachers. Can we begin by talking about what those core science principles are briefly and the teacher action framework?
Sure, I'll start out for us. Learning science principles, it's probably a field that's about 20 years old and where it is very interdisciplinary. So it's integrating a lot of research across disciplines. So for example, cognitive science, psychology, neurosciences, it's really talking about how people learn. And so in this context, there's a group called Deans for Impact who really honed in with education and what are the core learning science principles that every educator should be demonstrating more as norms. And those principles are framed around cognitive psychology, encoding, retrieval, and environment. And so with that content, Deans for Impact produced a framework which has both learning science principles and then aligned teacher actions. It's intentionally a small focus because learning science is very large. So this, again, is just the core, the heart of what educators, regardless of content area, regardless of how old or young a learner is, should be just norms and routines of our practice. And so an example of a principle that would be aligned with encoding would be connecting the dots. And so this is, for example, an action that a teacher would make is connecting to prior knowledge. And when most people review the principles and teacher actions framework, especially experienced educators, they will say, this isn't really new. And that is the reinforcement. Don't make learning sciences, evidence-based practices not be our norm. So many schools and teacher education preparation programs focus on a lot of initiatives, but we have sort of missed the heart of the foundation of how people learn. And that's really what this chapter is sort of bringing to the forefront for us to remember, but then also being able to connect with the virtual education platform.
Okay, Karen, would you like to add something to this?
Yeah, I'm just saying that, when we look at teacher development, and that's kind of connects us all in the field, we all work with those principles in both conscious ways, and for our students, they become conscious of that through our modeling and our teaching. And although Lena and I didn't work with the principles at the beginning as consciously with our students, through the process of our engagement and reflection on our action using virtual exchange, we're able to extract what that modeling actually had for our teachers in their own preparation and development.
This is fascinating. And Alina, what would you like to add to this discussion?
Yes, bringing a learning science lens into virtual exchange helped us move beyond access and internationalization to better understand the cognitive, motivational, and relational processes that support teacher development and disciplinary learning. So I think this chapter actually grew directly out of our work in teacher education and action research. And it represents our third COIL iteration. From the beginning, we designed the virtual exchange not as an add-on, but as an integrated part of the disciplinary learning experience.
Yes, I think that's extremely important, that you're not just adding on a particular assignment or a module, but you're integrating into the discipline the global collaboration through virtual exchange. And as you said, one form of that virtual exchange being the collaborative online international learning, or COIL as it's known. And I think this is really what has to be done for us to progress into deeper into more disciplines and deeper into our disciplines.
Haley, if I could just add there, is that we found it extremely useful to use that framework in terms of supporting our own reflexive practice in the way in which we designed our virtual exchange and also engaged. And one of the questions we had for ourselves, but also people that we've engaged with when we've shared our practice, was, how important it is to have a kind of a disciplined framework to think about how we design our virtual exchange processes, and also what we model for our student teachers.
Yes,
I don't know, Alina, if you'd like to add to that.
Yes, I think one thing we did very intentionally in this chapter was organize the findings around how students actually experience the learning, rather than the formal order of the learning science principles framework. So, for example, we saw strong alignment with all the key learning science principle dimensions. Creating a motivating environment, practicing with purpose, building feedback loops, deepening meaning and learning, connecting ideas, and managing the learning load. But what stood out was the sequence in which these principles showed up in students' reflections. For example, students didn't start by talking about cognitive load or structure. What surfaced first were motivation, curiosity, and the relational aspects of the experience, feeling connected to partners, feeling safe to engage, and feeling genuinely interested in learning from one another. So those affective and relational conditions then made it possible for more demanding learning processes to follow, like purposeful practice, giving and receiving feedback, and integrating theory into practice. So we intentionally present those findings in the chapter in reverse order from how the framework is typically depicted. And I think that's very important to address. That reversal reflects the lived pedagogical experience, like motivation and relationships came first, and they lay the foundation for deeper meaning making and effective learning over time.
Those are excellent points. Can we now move to answering the questions? It's a natural progression right into now the first questions I posed at the top of the podcast. So what impact did this global virtual exchange experience have on disciplinary learning? And what would have been missed if it was not included in your teaching?
I'd say I'll just start because I wasn't the instructor, but I was the individual sort of sharing the learning sciences and the teacher actions framework. And again, it's not new content, but when I did share it with Karen and Alina, it made a lot of sense and aligned with the first research question. It really allowed, in this case, the instructors to be really reflective of their practice. In many cases, it was celebrating how they were integrating without even intentionally doing it. But again, we have, in this case, two high quality instructors that were really already embedding learning sciences and teacher actions within their norm of their practice. But that's what we are hoping all teachers can be doing, and especially as we are working with pre-service and in-service teachers. So it's not that they necessarily found these large gaps, but it was more validation of providing high quality instruction to students.
Natalie, can I add to what you're saying is as an instructor, I think and linking to what Alina said before about relationality and creating that motivating environment is because when we engage with virtual exchange, we don't have that much control of how and the participants, in this case, the student teachers and the teachers were engaging with each other when they met, or they communicated asynchronistically. So we had to pay a lot of attention to how we would mediate the creation of that relational environment to enable that connection and learning between students and in different countries, and with also issues related to language barriers. And it was very, very important to spend quite an emphasis on that, and also looking at the way in which we designed the challenge of the assessment tasks and the feedback loops. So I think those elements, those principles kind of stood out for us as absolutely key in the virtual exchange environment. I don't know if that, Alina, if you'd like to add to that from your experience.
Sure. Yes, what we saw is that virtual exchange actually strengthened the discipline of teacher education in very concrete ways. Without it, students would have engaged primarily with familiar local perspectives. By integrating that virtual exchange into the course, we created a space where action research, intercultural dialogue, and learning science principles intersected in authentic ways that deepen both understanding and professional identity. So across our data, students' experiences align strongly with the core learning science dimensions: motivation, purposeful practice, feedback, and reflection, even though, as Karen mentioned, the LSP and teacher actions framework were never explicitly taught. So working with real educators in different contexts made the assignments feel meaningful and consequential. Disciplinarily, they sharpen, I think, their thinking. Students clarified research questions more precisely. They connected theory to classroom realities more intentionally and became more aware of how context shapes educational problems and solutions. Engaging across contexts also expanded their understanding of equity, access, and culture-responsive practices. And also for us, the instructors, the virtual exchange created a structure for modeling reflective practice and feedback cycles in ways that are central to high quality teacher education. When embedded intentionally, COIL didn't compete with disciplinary learning. It amplified it by making inquiry more relational, critical, and grounded in real world teaching.
This is an amazing chapter. It is a chapter that I certainly enjoyed reading and learned from as a professor. Before we conclude, is there anything else you would like to say overall about the research process or your findings? Natalie?
I'm just excited about it. I will say that, but I have my bias that this is the area that I like to study and do research, being the learning sciences. But again, I think it is interesting how Alina mentioned the framework wasn't just explicitly given to the learners. The instructors were just using it more as a guide for them to reflect on their practice and how to enhance their practice, or as they started looking at student work, which will lead into the second research question, how even our learners were already embedding learning science principles into their own practice. And so I think it also just shows how universal across the globe learning science principles are, and we just really need to honor them and make sure that they stay a norm and a focus of our practice.
I think Natalie, I think for all of our students that, just that experience of being part of this virtual exchange process, and as you yourself have said, it's like Alina and I are both kind of experienced practitioners to a certain extent in the virtual exchange environment, but as educators in teacher education, to have our students have this modeled for them, and also to have that opportunity of being part of a virtual exchange community was an extremely exciting opportunity for everyone, and also modeled for our teachers' practices, or our trainee teachers practices in that they could explore further as they go out into the field. So having that modeling and demonstrated, I think, is really, really important. And the learning science principles and teacher actions really force one to actually reflect critically on your own praxis. So for me, it was, although we'd been using them in our own way, drawn from psychology, I hadn't seen them before I met you and before I met Alina, written down in that way. So that was really, really useful. So it was a learning for me as an instructor, and part of it's become part of my own development. So thank you for that, Natalie.
Yeah, great.
Alina, you have the last word. What would you like to add?
Yes, I wonder if we should talk a little bit about the partnership and how we met each other, and then maybe I can tell a little bit about final thoughts, kind of overall this learning experience for me, what it meant.
Oh, yes, please.
Would that be okay? So yes, Karen and I met about 5 years ago in 2021, and our relationship really grew organically. While at the University of Missouri St. Louis, our university has had a long-standing relationship with University of the Western Cape. We are actually celebrating 40 years of an amazing partnership this year. Our collaboration began when Karen reached out to my dean and shared her interest in action research and teacher development. And then from the very beginning, our partnership was built around shared research, teaching, and learning, and it naturally evolved into collaborative scholarship and joint publications. And then in 2022, we formally launched our first COIL together, even though neither of our institutions had dedicated COIL infrastructure at the time. And so we kind of learned as we went, drawing on our experiences and resources. And then we got some support from different grants, which allow us to visit each other's contexts. And that relationship didn't just support the partnership, it made the work more human, I think more resilient, and ultimately more impactful. We became really, really great friends. So that's a nice story behind how this whole thing started. And this year we are launching our 5th COIL iteration, and I'll be visiting South Africa again in March to continue to work with Karen. And we are very excited about what's next. And then for this particular project, again, we invited Dr. Natalie Bolton to join us because of her expertise in learning science principles and teacher actions framework.
Yeah, and Lena, I was just thinking of our partnership and what's been so exciting in it as that at the start of our partnership, we built in a research and publication component, and we've kind of grown through that process and helped to support each other and develop professionally and intellectually through this partnership. And I just want to say, I know what Alina and I spoke about takeaways. I suppose a big takeaway here would be that in future, more people engage in not just only these virtual exchange partnerships, but a real research collaboration, particularly around virtual exchange. Because our experience has been, it's like been quite limited to find people actually researching their practice. Yeah.
Yes, I think that one of the reasons we were so intentional about documenting this work is that despite the growing use of virtual exchange and COIL in teacher education, there is still relatively little empirical research that examines how and why these practices actually support learning. So we know from experience that virtual exchange can be powerful, but without systematic research, it's hard to understand what's doing the pedagogical work, what conditions support meaningful learning, and what kinds of design decisions really matter. I think by studying this practice through a learning science lens, we were able to move beyond simply saying that COIL is valuable and instead show how it supports motivation, reflection, feedback, and disciplinary learning over time. That kind of evidence is especially important for teacher education, where we are preparing educators to be reflective, research-informed practitioners.
Very well said. And I think we're going to end on that note. I want to thank the three of you for being here. Your chapter was really something very important for all of the professors teaching, as well as your preparation for the education teachers, both in service as well as pre-service. Thank you for your time. Thank you for your outstanding scholarship. I commend the sustainability of your collaboration, which is really what we hope all professors continue to strive for in both doing the research as well as continuing the relationship among themselves. Thank you for this podcast.
Thank you so much, Kelly.
Thank you, everybody. Thank you, Kelly.